Hello, listeners. My name is Basha, and welcome to Net Zero Compare, the podcast where we unpack how climate policy dynamics work in practice. Today, we're talking about a question at the heart of the net zero transition. When do firms decide to go green? Carbon prices in Europe are rising again. The EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, or mostly known as CBAM, is moving towards full implementation. And free allowances or pollution permits under the EU ETS that were being used before are being phased out. Policymakers are betting that stronger, more credible carbon pricing will finally unlock large scale clean investments. But of course, we know that firms don't just react to today's prices, they react to what they think policy will look like in 5, 10, or 20 years. My guest today is Bas Gorrens, a researcher at KU Leuven's economics department, whose research looks exactly at this issue. His research lies at the intersection of environmental economics, international trade, and industrial organization. Bas, welcome to Net Zero Compare.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to talk about this issue in detail.
Great, me too. I'm gonna start with the big picture first. Your paper is called When to Go Green, Firm Dynamics and Clean Technology Adoption, which already suggests that this is more about timing, not just whether firms decarbonize. In simple terms, what problem were you trying to solve with your paper?
No, exactly. This is about firms and firms when they want to invest, when they want to adopt new clean technologies. It takes time, and they don't do this given the current prices. They do this given the fact of given what they expect that the future price is going to be actually. So in essence, this paper is going to was aimed to solve this question of this big debate which was happening in the previous decade, where the prices were really low, the price of carbon, yet at the same time many industrialists, many people from the government were arguing that we have to be very careful with how we set up these policies because they might hurt firms in the future actually. So to kind of rationalize this trade-off, given the fact that firms take time in their adoption decision, I built this new framework and I wanted to do more research surrounding this area.
I see. A lot of climate models assume firms respond to today's carbon price, but yours assume firms are forward-looking. Why is that assumption so important?
The word explains itself actually in a way. Like we are in the green transition, so we're transitioning from one state of the world, for a state where we pollute CO2 emissions, to a state of the world where hopefully CO2 emissions are relatively absent.
Mm-hmm.
So you go, you transition to something. So in that sense, the firms know that they have to transition to it. So the whole one static framework doesn't make much sense in that regard, because they know that they will not end up in the same state of the world again.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a long process at the end. One thing policymakers often hear is frustration. We introduced carbon pricing years ago. Why didn't firms immediately clean up? In your model, firms often delay adopting clean technologies. Why is waiting sometimes the rational choice?
No, indeed, the policy is not there to hurt the firms. The policy is there to push them towards the decarbonized state. So in a way, you want prices to be low. You want the policy to convey them the message that they should green up and they should green as fast as possible. So it gives time. So it takes time. So firms might wait if it's better for them, just because like it's too costly to do it now. In the future, it might be more beneficial. At the same time, they also might be more uncertain about future prices, about their own current affairs, and they will not do much if the world is too uncertain. They will only invest in more certain environment. So these two things play a role in why firms are more inclined to wait and to adopt later. And definitely in the innovation part plays a big role in that sense as well, actually, where like because they know that in the future the technology is going to be cheaper, everything is going to be better of like they expected at least, then it might actually be beneficial for them to wait. But at the same time, then they face a higher cost. So in a sense, it's a trade-off they have to endure, and they have to make the rational decisions given this trade-off.
Mm. But just to be clear, those firms, when they wait, they are not ignoring the climate policy. They're just waiting for the optimal timing for their costs and investments.
The way that the EU has set up the ETS is so that the policy cannot be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
At least not from the firm's perspective. Of course, if the government puts more certificates into the market, then it's a different question. But from the firm's perspective, from the moment they don't do much, then the prices will rise just even more, and then this will turn them to have to do something in a sense. So the EU has really made sure that at least firms have to do something, where it's adoption of investment into new clean technologies, or whether it's just reduction of production, the EU doesn't make a stance in. Yet they do require the firms to do something in order to reduce their emissions. Yes.
Okay. This actually helps explain some things we observed in the real world. During much of the 2020s, EU carbon prices were low, and critics said that the ETS wasn't working. So, Bas, does your model suggest that low carbon prices back then were a policy failure or a predictable outcome of a gradual policy tightening?
No, indeed, the policy was not a failure to begin with, actually. From three points of view, you could say. On the one hand, like the prices are going to be low because you have to give firms time to adopt. If you would have gone super fast, then it would just hurt the firms substantially more, and you would reduce welfare in the aggregate substantially more as well. And that's something that policymakers are not really inclined to do. Secondly, because the way the market is set up, you could say because firms adopt more, because they know that in the future prices will rise, this will make it easier for them to abide to the new regulations, because that's easier for them to set up to reach the cap of emissions which is allowed, and therefore the price will even decline. So what you see is just an endogenous reaction of the price to the market clearing effect. And thirdly, this has also something to do with the political economy. This is not in the model, but I just want to highlight it slightly. It's the fact that if you would, which comes a bit back to this first point of view, actually, if you would make the targets super fast, super high, then firms would just ignore them, or they would just be not be able to abide with them, and this whole policy concept would just break down. So the government really needed to do it in a more gradual approach, actually, in order to make the firms be able to abide with it.
Hmm. I see. So we can say it was more of a natural reaction to the policy. Let's talk about which firms move first. According to your results, what types of firms adopt clean technologies earliest and why?
So yes, this story is mainly the story about clean technology adoption rather than innovation. It's not the fact that innovation does not play a role, but what I see in the data, it's mainly driven by clean technology adoption. And this makes that adoption, in a sense, is costly. It's costly for the firms to adopt new windmills, to adopt a new high level plant. So the main reason why firms want to adopt these is because they have the capacity to do so, because they're already large. So in a sense, the large firms are more inclined to adopt clean technologies. On the other hand, you can see there's a catch-up mechanism going on, where it's mainly driven by the large polluting firms, let's say, where because they are more polluting, the policy is going to be more costly. They know they have to change to something, so for them, it's very much a reason to abide first, let's say. But this is only at the beginning. After a while, it's more or less equal. But at the beginning, it's very much driven by these large, more polluting firms to catch up to the frontier, let's say.
See, so does that mean does that mean climate policy fits more to a small number of big industrial players?
In a sense, it does. I mean, the climate policy is not directed to the small, clean firms to begin with, because they don't feel any negative effects, and in a way they might even feel slightly positive relocation effect. But I find in my framework that those relocation effects are really small, actually. So it's mainly a within firm component, let's say, where the firms themselves are the driving factors in getting cleaner
Mm-hmm. I
rather than
see.
relocation. Yeah. So it's there you can really see that that it's these large polluting firms that are a driving factor to this. But actually, as a government as well, you want these firms to be the ones who are driving the results, because these are also the ones who are driving the emissions, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, the regulations are mostly important for these, it's true. Um, a major concern is that net zero debate is an economical cost. Output loss, competitiveness, and deindustrialization. In your simulations, how large are the output losses from reaching net zero under carbon pricing?
So in my simulations, this would be way up to at most 2% per year relative to a baseline scenario where the policy would not be there, of course, right? So this is at most, because it's a gradual approach. This implications are quite limited. If you would go back to a static approach where you just compare one state of the world with the other, and you just would transition in a very short time period, these output losses would be much more severe, actually. While I find that because of this gradual thing, because the firms have time to adopt new clean technologies, it's less. It's only 2% per year, essentially.
Yeah. You often hear people overestimate those costs. What do you think drives the fact that those costs are smaller than people actually expect?
Mm, Oh, that's a good question to begin with. I would say something I highlighted already a few times is this fact that this gradual approach is there, this gradual policy implementation is there. Secondly, things like innovation play a role, where like because the firms have time to wait for the new innovative goods, they then it gets cheaper for them as well, and then they might adopt faster too, actually. So I would say those two main reasons. So in essence, this all comes back to time, let's say, right? Because the firms have time,
Yeah.
then these either through the fact that the policy is not too strict, and either the fact that they can wait for the new innovative goods to arise. This makes that the actual results are not that severe relative to where you would limit the time that the governments would that the firms would receive.
Yeah, it seems like they are focusing more on the output reduction rather than the technology adoption innovation you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
I
So you
understand
could,
correctly.
yeah, you could see that emissions, you could, in a very simplistic way, you could decompose emissions into either reduction of output, where you just say, okay, I'm emitting less because I'm producing less, and it's a very valid way of reduction, but that's not the reduction you as a government want, because it's going to hurt your demand as well, your output, your labor, yeah, everything essentially. On the other hand, you can reduce your emissions through adopting these clean technologies, and that's actually the real. Then you can still produce as much as you want,
Mhm.
but just you kind of decouple your output from your emissions, and it's kind of the way you want to reduce your emissions, actually, to achieve this kind of clean technological advancement.
Okay, I see. I want to bring this directly to the current policy news. The EU CBAM is moving toward its full implementation. Imports of steel, cement, aluminium, and other products will increasingly face a carbon price at the border. The political argument for CBAM is that it protects competitiveness and prevents carbon leakage. Based on your research, do firms really need border measures like CBAM to remain competitive under carbon pricing? Or do expectations and technology adoption already do a lot of that work?
In a way, it's beneficial. It's beneficial to have a CBAM. It's not bad, and yes, firms will be less severely hit. Domestic firms will be less severely hit through the implementation of the CBAM, and even because they will be less severely hit, they might even adopt more clean technologies. So in that way, the CBAM definitely is a helpful instrument for the domestic firms at home. On the other hand, for domestic consumers, they cannot substitute away anymore to the cheaper foreign goods, so they will get hurt even more. So it depends a bit from the perspective of the government. What you want? Do you want to protect your firms, or do you want to protect your consumers? But I also want to highlight here, because now I'm saying that the CBAM is very important, and in a more normative way it is. But if you look at it from a quantitative point of view, it's not directly that important, because of the fact that that all relocation, in a sense, is nullified if firms just have enough time in order to adopt these clean technologies, actually. Because what you see is, if you give firms time, the prices will remain low. And therefore, they will never really have how to say, to pay more taxes, essentially, and to be hurt. And just by the fact that I know in the future it's going to be higher, but if it's in the very distant future only, and not in the near future. And so in my sense, what I would argue, this is from a welfare point of view, this would be optimal, let's say.
Okay. So do you see CBAM as reinforcing the same anticipation mechanism you model? But
That's
would you see that also as at a
Mhm.
global level, or just in Europe?
It's a good way to summarize it, yes. But indeed, this is only from the European point of view. If you would look at it from the global level, the results will be completely different, actually. And I maybe should have highlighted that much earlier. So thank you for pointing it out. Because indeed, CBAM makes that foreign firms are also now more inclined to adopt clean technologies. And indeed, if you look at it from from the from the how do you say, from the global point of view, a CBAM is just objectively a good instrument in order to reduce global emissions, even more than it is an instrument targeted towards domestic emissions. So no, I'm definitely in favor of a CBAM also, and why I said that it's not necessary for this European firms, it's definitely a necessary requirement for foreign firms, for which their domestic government does not really have a carbon policy in place.
Okay, I see. Um, okay, Bas, to wrap up, let me ask you a final question. If you
Mhm.
had to give policymakers one lesson from your research as they design the next phases of EU climate policies, what would it be? What would you?
That's a very direct question to ask to an economist. I would say one thing I see more and more more and more news about is adoption. Like, and also what I find in my paper, it's adoption. So anything that increases adoption, either to subsidies, or to facilitating the innovative goods, or anything in that remark, would be much more helpful than even a carbon border adjustment mechanism, or even any other trade protection or something, which are much more which are targeted much more bluntly. So no, I would definitely focus more on making the innovative goods cheaper, either through subsidies, or to more innovation subsidies, or pushing innovation. Let's say that I think that's the way forward from a European point of view, as well from a global point of view.
Mhm. No, definitely. Like putting all those policies into action is the most important step for now. But thank you so much for joining us on Net Zero Compare. What I take away from this conversation is that climate policy isn't just about how high the carbon price is today, but it's also about whether firms believe the transition is real and worth investing in early. As CBAM rolls out and carbon prices rise, the real test will be whether those expectations translate into faster and clean investments. Exactly the dynamic Bas's ratios help us understand. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Bas, for joining and
Very
giving
much.
us your important insights. And we'll see you next time on Net Zero Compare. Oké, dan moet ik de opname stoppen.